dare great things for Christ. Christ calls us to dare great things. In the marketplace, as well as in the mission field, there has never been a time like the present for the spirit of the Catholic entrepreneur. Now is the time for men and women of great courage and great vision to engage our church and our culture. Now is the time to dare great things. And here is your host as we dare great things, Father Nathan Cromley, the president and founder of the St. John Institute.
Across the board and throughout time, leaders have always complained about being alone. The expression, "it's lonely at the top," says it well. But this loneliness is not always a bad thing. In fact, usually it's the result of doing what leaders have to do. When you lead, you're first. And when you're first, you're necessarily alone. In this third part of our series on embracing solitude, we look at the particular solitude that comes from planning and the surprising ways that we can find Christ there. All right, everybody. So today we take a look at our third part of our series on embracing solitude. Now, the reason I want to do this series and why I like it so much is because I really find that leadership leads to Christ. And this, of course, is my position as a Catholic priest, but it's also a position that I'd like to see shared by you. I'd like to have you be more aware of the spirituality that can come for those who are particularly called to lead. It's not an easy thing, which is why so few people choose to do it, right? To step out, to make the difference, to begin the action, to carry things through, right? To finish them. It's just so much easier to stay in the crowd of anonymity than it is to embrace the solitude of leadership. There really is. And that's why I want to do this, because when you embrace your leadership, you also embrace Christ. Why? Because Jesus has sent us into this world to continue his mission. And in the Gospel of St. John, he commands us, "Remain in me as I remain in you. You will remain in me if you keep my commandments," right? So if we are in obedience to Christ, living in union with him, but that's done by doing what he told us to do, well, then we will remain in him. Well, that means that our life as a mission, being a mother, being a bride, being a good husband, being a grandfather, being an uncle, right? The state of our life, and therefore everything that comes from it, including having a job. And for some of us, like, our job is a big part of our identity. It's it's our usage of our gifts. Well, that means that embracing that job and embracing the call that comes with the state of life as if it mattered to us, as if it was the place where we expressed who we were, is where we're going to glorify God and therefore keep the commandments of Christ. He has sent us into this world to claim it for him by intentional, decisive action, right? The action of being a mom, the action of being a daughter, the action that comes with charity. You can't say that love is not expressed in actions. Love is expressed in actions. I'm thinking, for example, of the various contemplative sisters that I've met and monks and hermits along the way. You know, if you think of cloistered nuns as an example, it's like, what does a cloistered sister do all day? Well, when you go and visit them, they say, "Oh my gosh, our days are just so full," and they are. Do you realize that cloistered sisters never take vacations? You know, they never take a break. They do the same rhythm every single day, like a machine. And it's like, well, that's very demanding to do that same rhythm and to be there on time when the bell rings, right? That's an action. It's a decision that they make to invest themselves in their prayer so that their voice is sung as a hymn of praise to Christ. You know, that takes a lot of effort. You could sing, for example, just taking the example of the contemplative nun a step further, right? I mean, you could sing as if it didn't matter. You could hold your heart back, but it would be a lack of love. Wherever there is love, there's an action. There's a fruit of that love. If you're going to be a son or a daughter in a family, and you say to yourself, well, I mean, like, okay, I am a son. How am I being a son? You're going to look at your actions. When was the last time that you did something to help your parents? When was the last time that you honored your father and your mother? right? I'm using really kind of examples that are far away from the world of business to show just how far-reaching and extensive this truth is. Where there is love, there is action, all right? Well, where there is action, there's also the solitude of identity, because wherever you've chosen to act, it's a place where then you've chosen to say, this is my action. So I'm responsible for what I have done. And again, this is hard for people. It'd be so much easier just to slip into anonymity, to claim victimhood. I act this way because these people made me act this way. Or I acted this way because that's what everyone else was doing. You know, these kind of like examples that say like it wasn't really my action. I was just going along with the action of the group or of the crowd. Right? But this is not what Christ calls us into. Christ calls us into an action that glorifies him by us revealing who he is through revealing who we are, by making decisions from the heart that we own. And this is also where leadership really begins, because the moment you own an action, you create a ripple effect. When you own something and do it from the inside, people notice it. Right? It's just think of the different people in your life that where you're like, this person's impactful in my life. Why are they impactful? You're going to say the same thing each time. Because they're authentic, because they're free, because they know who they are, right? All these great attributes. Well, it's the same for you. When you are authentic and free and sincere and doing what you know is right, well, it's attractive, right? It's the attractive force of leadership. And something goes along with that. Every time that we do that, when you really own something, it means there's a type of solitude that we also have to embrace. And this is not an easy thing for us to do. Man is a social animal. That's what Plato said way back in the day. It's actually Socrates, but Socrates was Plato. There's all these different theories about how this was done. But if you read it, man is a social animal. It's just a foundational truth. Just, you know, we want to be together, and we find security in belonging to a group. All right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with this. But the fact that we're a social animal also is the context for leadership. Right. But remember what I'm saying. The fact that you're a leader doesn't mean that you're always the person in charge. It means that you're a person who's in charge of your action. Even if it's an action that's you're doing at the command of another. If you do it from the inside, chosen out of love, then you can find God there, because the way that you are following is actually an act of leadership. Right? You could tell it a mile away. When you're trying to hire somebody, you're actually trying to look who is a follower. That's when you're hiring someone, you're hiring a follower. Well, what are you looking for? How well do they follow? And if you're like, well, they're just a robot and they do exactly what I say. I mean, most bosses are going to say this is not the type of follower that I want, because we need something more than a robot. If a robot can do it, well, then why do I need you? Right? I need you for the things that a robot can't do, which is the things that go beyond simple execution. I need someone who can think, make decisions, who can fill their position with the radiance of a culture that will attract and build up their fellow workers. You know, I mean, like all of the other attributes that belong to what a healthy company is need to belong to the people that we hire. And so we're looking for people who are more than just executing and following, who follow like leaders, who follow like people who own what the word of command is coming from us, from the boss, and who own it from the inside, and who fill it then with all of those other things that you could never have time or even energy or thought to command, with the personality of a person who owns their position. That's just fabulous. When you find that person, as we all know, you're like, this is great. It's like when a parent looks down at their children, right? And you find kids that are trying to cooperate and be a part of the family and taking care of things and volunteering and helping. You're like, this child is absolutely a marvel in my family. But yet, how is it that they're like that? What's the difference? The difference is that they are choosing what they do. And choosing what you do from the inside fills it with your identity. It's not the outside position that makes a leader. It's the inner choice of identity that makes a leader. And we Christians are called to put our name on everything that we do, to fill where we are and do what we do from the inside with that identity, because that identity is the distinctive marker of the glory of God in us. It's our soul. It's our name. And Christ wants us to say that name that he himself gave us to this world to testify to him. And I want to develop that more with you.
Would you like to hear more from Father Nathan? Join the St. John Leadership Network and receive a 2-minute glance at the gospel every Sunday morning right to your phone. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
We're talking about leadership from the vantage point of action. And the reason I like to do that is because the commandment that we got from Christ was to love one another. Right? What does love look like? Love looks like action. Right? Actions of different kinds, but it's a special type of quality in that action. It's an action that flows from our hearts, something that we own, that we've decided upon, and that we engage in. And like I said before, when you do that, you suddenly find yourself in a position of solitude, because now you can be judged. People can say, "Did you do this?" And your answer is yes. Not, "I wasn't aware," not, "someone else told me to," not, "I thought it was everyone was doing." I did it. Right? And there's a solitude there, because if you did it, well, then you're the one that owns that action and no one else. Right? And yet at that moment, the glorious moment, when we can say, "I did it, this was from me," you also have an encounter with Christ. And that's what I want to talk about here. How do we meet Christ in these moments of leadership, right? So in the first, last time we met, we talked about how there's a solitude that comes from innovation, from being the first to think of things. And we looked at how even in Christ's life, he was embracing that solitude. Today, I want to talk about the next phase of leadership, which is the phase of decision. And this, of course, is a very difficult phase, because in it, we have to go from the many possible ways that we can achieve something into the one way that we're going to dedicate ourselves to. And a lot of people stumble at this part, because on the one hand, you can have people that are very gifted at finding ideas, that just have a million ideas a second. And even if they've disciplined themselves to become really good at making ideas, it's one thing to have ideas, to see ways that are possible to go through a situation or a problem. And it's another thing to be able to choose the right way, right? You can have ideas about ways, but you can also make a ton of mistakes. And sometimes, especially in business, you don't have a lot of room to make mistakes. I mean, of course, you have to be willing to make mistakes, especially if you're innovating. But on the other hand, that's for the R&D department, all right? You do research and development, you pay them a budget to make mistakes for the company, but the company can't make too many mistakes, right? And we need to execute the right thing at the right time in the right way, at the right amount, and for the right price, right? If we don't, we die, right? So now all of a sudden, we realize that this ability to choose the right way amidst the many possibilities that we have in front of us, it presents a unique kind of solitude. How do you come to that conclusion? And there's different theories about this. We all know them from our management classes, right? Where you've got the consensus approach, where you try to get a consensus, to the dictator approach, where the person in charge simply makes the decision. Then you have the blended approach, and each one of them has advantages and disadvantages. If you're trying to get an answer that's quick, well, then the higher up you go to simply make the decision isn't necessary. You can't have a consensus form immediately. But if you need more buy-in, well, then obviously from the people involved, if it's a more complicated, that's going to require more effort and motivation, well, then you need more buy-in. And the more buy-in requires a more of a consensus approach to the thing. Well, you make these decisions in different ways. But wherever we are in that decision ladder, and there's a point where we have to choose to own it. Even if we're a part of the group and the decision is coming to us from above, the decision that I make to say, yes, I'm going to engage my heart, my will, my passion, my personality, my identity into this action is a choice that I have to make. And the moment that I make it is the moment that I stand out. Right? So if everyone's sitting around looking for the consensus, it's going to be those people that say, let's do it, guys. Now, they're saying, let's do it. So as soon as you say, let's do it, guys, You're now exerting a leadership in that group. And I mean, blessed are you, right? Like every boss loves it when he has employees or she has employees who turn around and say, let's do it, guys, right? Because you're like, oh my gosh, this is great. I've got people that are buying in, who are choosing to invest their identity, put their name behind something that's happening. And of course, the question is, how do you know it's the right thing? Because you can't do that too many times. If you're always just saying, let's do it, eventually the other people in the group say, well, you always say that, and it doesn't always work out. You have to be intelligent every time. So what does this mean to be intelligent at that particular phase of leadership, which is making the decision? Well, let's look for the answer here where we usually look. Let's go back to Aristotle. And I'm laughing because you're like, I usually don't look to Aristotle. But you can, right? Like Aristotle is a real genius about this type of thing. Because in Aristotle, he actually lays out for us how you work and make decisions in work. And of course, Aristotelian thought has been developed by St. Thomas Aquinas, then developed by other philosophers in Western history. And I want to take a look at that whole type of, Catholic thought tradition, Catholic intellectual tradition, to try to understand, how can we get at this decisive moment? Because if we can understand what we're doing at that moment, then we can also understand where we meet Christ and why he wants us as leaders to not be afraid of making decisions. This is something so many people struggle with. I actually refer to it in our own ministry at the St. John Institute. We call it the paralysis of fog, right? The paralysis of fog is where you can't make a decision because you can't see where you're going. And that can create a paralysis. And of course, if your leader is like that, and he or she is just paralyzed by fog, well, then you realize, the whole ship can just go down because you're staring straight at an iceberg, and you're not turning right or left. Right? And parents can do this a lot too. We're like, oh my gosh, this is such a quagmire. There's so many elements to this decision or this situation that we're just going to stare at it. Right? You can't. Leadership has to flow into action. And that means that leaders have to make decisions amongst the many possible ways, right or left or slow down or go faster or whatever it could be. We have to chart our course forward. To decide not to act is itself a decision. And every decision has consequences, right? So if we choose not to act, we also have to embrace those consequences. And we see where this trickles down to. We need to therefore free ourselves up and say, maybe I can't make the right decision because I don't know if it's right, but I have to make the best decision that I can make here and now, and so I will make it. And at that moment, you embrace the solitude of decision. You embrace the solitude of saying, this is the pathway behind which I'm going to put my resources, my reputation, my name, my energies, and it's this. That moment is a glorious moment, the decision moment. Because in that moment, we also meet Christ.
Would you like to start your Thursday mornings with a scriptural leadership lesson? Join the St. John Leadership Network, where Father Nathan hosts a 30-minute call at 6:30 a.m. in all 4 U.S. time zones. To learn more, go to www.stjohnleadershipnetwork.org/member and join for free today.
One of the reasons why I, as a Catholic priest, have decided to do leadership ministry is because I'm absolutely enthralled with the beautiful ways that God comes to meet us. And of course, like usually as a priest, we end up talking about this in terms of the sacraments and God's holy word. And it's of course true. And I want to look even more at another place that I'm enamored with, which is where an individual person suddenly catches fire for the faith, where the faith becomes real for them. And this is a decision that I made because in my ministry, I kept stumbling across this same phenomenon. Good Catholic people, good Christian people, right, would end up putting their faith in a little box called emotional solace. And you put it on a shelf and spending their lives doing in the quote unquote real world where they're making decisions and they're moving the world forward. And I saw a lot of times that Christian people would not be following their Christian faith in the real world because they would say, I don't know how to apply this stuff. In fact, to be successful in the world, you got to meet the world at its own terms. This is what they would say. And I'm thinking, well, that's really sad, because that deprives the real world, quote unquote, of the real power of the faith. And then meanwhile, we were over in the church, priests preaching to our choirs, so to speak. We're there in the church and we're echoing this tremendous, thunder and power, but it's not affecting that real world. And many times it's because the people who have the talents and the skills and the drive to make changes, they don't end up coming into the church. So the church is left bereft of talent, skill, drive, and the world is left bereft of faith, hope, and love. And I'm like, we got to build a bridge here. Right? Well, what is the bridge? The bridge is you. You are the people who bring the power of faith into the world, the leader, the person who stands up from their position in, quote unquote, the real world and says, I am really a Christian. I am really here out of the love I have for God and out of God's love for the world. And maybe I tell you that, about Jesus Christ, or maybe I don't. That's really a secondary issue. The point is, I'm all in. And that moment, I don't know a better word for it than leadership. It's the moment of leadership. It's where I see people embracing their life's mission as if it was their life's mission, right? Embracing every moment as if it were their mission. Every relationship as if it were their mission. When a person is engaged from the inside, they are compelling and they influence this world in a beautiful way. For they influence it for God. And so that's where I was like, this is where I want to bring attention so that folks can understand that the power of faith is more than just something that is expressed in terms of sacraments or expressed in terms of the Bible or the rosary or all the different things that we do in our devotions. It's also expressed in real acts of charity, which oftentimes look like a job. Because if you're not living charity in your job, you're missing the point, right? If you're not loving wherever you are with your passion in your heart, if you're not putting yourself there, well, then you're missing the point. Well, when we do that and we put ourselves behind decisions in particular, and we say, you know what, I'm going to decide, I'm going to make this. It's scary because that means that we own it. That we're making a choice. There are many possible good things, and we've chosen to take one course instead of another. Well, when I look at Jesus Christ himself in his life, I see a man who made decisions. Right? Think about, for example, how he went from the crowd of people to the 72 disciples whom he chose. And from the 72 disciples that he chose, he has the 12 apostles. And of the 12, he then has 3. Look at how he's got these concentric circles around him. And he gives his most intimate revelations to the 3, then more intimate, of course, than most to the 12, but more intimate than most to the 72. Like you see how it kind of cascades down. But that's a decision that he made. He made a decision to put Simon Peter at the head of those apostles, right? On this rock, I will build my church. He could have built it on Matthew. He could have built it on James. He could have built it on any of the apostles. He chose Simon. Why? Because there had to be one. There had to be a foundation. And he chose to make that foundation Simon Peter. Well, in the same way, he chose to not say anything when Herod was interrogating him. He chose to respond to Pilate, but not to respond to Herod. Right? You could say, well, how did you know that was the right choice? Well, of course, he was God, so he always knew. But he did it at the same time with consequence. The answers that he gave to Pontius Pilate, for example, led to his crucifixion. Pilate even says, do you not know that I have the power to release you and the power to crucify you? And Jesus says, you would have no power unless it was given to you from above. Well, I mean, maybe he could have defended himself. See, you start looking at things, you realize that Christ led a life that was full of decisions which led to consequences. And he embraced that. He was his own man. He even says, no one takes my life from me. I lay it down freely. And we can look at it and say, well, how do you know you did the right thing? Well, how does St. Paul know that he did the right thing? I love looking at Acts chapter 16, where St. Paul literally goes to 3 different places only to find that after he gets there, or as he's trying to get there, the Holy Spirit says, no, this is the wrong place. God leads him by shutting doors, but he asks him to go forward even though the doors might be shut in his face. It's like almost like that's not the problem. The problem is not that you don't find your way. The problem is that you're scared to make the decision that could lead you there. And yet, if we don't make those decisions, we don't take those steps, we also keep our love at bay. And this is something we can't do. There's a union with Christ, trusting in his merciful love that all of us get to experience when we take a risk. And when we put ourselves behind an idea because it's the best to us and it seems to be the right one, without knowing if it actually is, we glorify God because we say, in the end, I'm never alone. And the God who led me here can lead me in the next step. The God who of my past is also the God of my future. And I entrust my future to him. I put my past in his mercy, my present in his love, and my future in his providence. And I tread boldly forward, making the decisions that I have to make, because while you might not be with me, he is.
Dare great things for Christ.
Share your feedback with Father Nathan. Send us an email at communications@stjohninstitute.org. That's communications@stjohninstitute.org. And visit www.stjohninstitute.org and sign up for our newsletter to receive updates from Father Nathan.